Welcome back. We have been talking about different isms, rather. You can say in unit number one, you dealt with classicism. Then in unit number two, we talked about neoclassicism. In unit number three, we talked about romanticism and Victorian criticism. So in unit number four, we shall be dealing with modernism and new criticism. Now let's try to understand what modernism is in literature. When we talk about literary modernism, or what we understand as modernist literature, these are the alternative terms. Modernism stands for literary, means we are talking in the context of literature. Therefore, it is literary modernism. Modernism is applicable to other arts as well, other fields as well. Here, we are applying it to literary modernism, literature. It is also called modernist literature. And this modernism has its origins in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. You need to understand that. Modernism has its origin in the late 19th, means in the decade of 90 to 1900, we can say, 1890 to onwards. And the early 20th century means from 1901 to 1920, 30, etc. Okay, that period is known as uh, modernist period in literature, or literary modernism. And this term refers to the movement in Europe and North America, that is the USA, we can say. And modernism, or literary modernism, is characterized by a very self-conscious break. It is a kind of break with traditional ways of writing. And it is applicable to poetry and prose fiction. There's a kind of break. They started writing in a different manner. They actually self-consciously broke away from the traditional ways of writing in both poetry and prose fiction. And this modernism impacted music, art, and literature. How? Let's try to understand. It impacted music, art, and literature by radically undoing. You just should note down the word undoing. We undo in computer, something. If something goes wrong, we undo and redo it. So it, by undoing traditional forms of expressing. Okay, so it undid the traditional forms expressing a sense of modern life. Traditional forms, according to the modernists, failed to express a sense of modern life. So it is a kind of sharp break from the past and its rigid conventions. You might be knowing that the earlier period was known as Victorian age, and it was influenced by the ideas of Matthew Arnold, who was a traditionalist. He wasn't a modernist. He's well known for his cultural criticism. And in literature, the elements of modernism are thematic, formal, and stylistic. Means what exactly? Modernism and its features can be found in literature in terms of its themes, in terms of the form, genres, we can say, in terms of the way the poetry was written, the way the novels were written, the way the dramas were written. And it was again stylistic as well. Stylistic means manner, related to manner. Style is the way of doing things. So in terms of theme, in terms of form, and in terms of style, literature drastically changed because of the influence of modernism. Now, this is a kind of impulse. Impulse means something which you feel like sudden doing without thinking. We can say, no, it is his. We sometimes say a particular person is very impulsive. We do everything according to our impulses. Impulses do not involve rational thinking as such, going according to your mind. So the modernist impulse is fueled in various literatures. Fuel means this impulse was fueled. Fuel means supported, you can here say. You can understand it here like that. Fuel, you fuel means you must petrol, diesel, etc. is added to increase the burning, increase the fire, we can say. So this fire was increased by various uh, aspects such as industrialization and urbanization. And one more thing was there by the search for an authentic response to a much changed world. The world was changing drastically, and the literature was falling short to express or uh, give outlet to the changed world in an authentic manner, in a truthful manner. Therefore, this particular impulse gained momentum. Of course, there were pre-war works. You might be knowing the First World War took place between 1914 to 1919. Earlier to that, the works by Henry James, Joseph Conrad, and other writers are considered modernist. But modernism as a literary movement is typically associated with the period after World War First. So you can understand it in the context of Romanticism. Romanticism was there in Britain before 1798 as well. We consider William Blake, Robert Southey, Robert Burns, sorry, not Southey, Robert Burns as pre-romantic poets. Walter Scott, William Blake, Robert Burns are described as pre-romantic poets. And then we talk about William Wordsworth, S.T. Coleridge, Robert Southey, the Lake poets, as the romantic poets of first generation. Okay, similarly, before 1914, before the First World War, there were works by Henry James and Joseph Conrad and other writers. They were considered modernist, but still, when we talk about modernism, the beginning of modernism as a literary movement, it is associated with the period after World War First. And the eminent figure in this particular movement was T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot is well known for the Westland. We are going to study an essay, a critical essay by T.S. Eliot. So T.S. Eliot is well known for his poetic work, The Westland. And in this work, the enormity of the war had undermined humankind's faith in the foundations of Western society and culture. What had happened after post First World War, the post-war, we can say, situation, humankind's faith in the foundations of Western society and culture was, challenged, shattered. They became skeptic the way we have become today because of the pandemic situations. COVID-19 has, made life so uncertain. We are living under fear every now and then. We are afraid of human beings itself, other human beings. So similar was the scenario after the First World War. So the faith was, shattered. So post-war modernist literature reflected a sense of disillusionment and fragmentation. So you can understand, after every 100 years, this kind of disillusionment and fragmentation becomes evident in human society, and the literature reflected it. And I wonder if that will be reflected, the contemporary situation will be reflected in literature. Of course, that is going to be reflected because reflected literature is the mirror to society or mirror of society, mirror head to society or mirror of society. It is a reflection of life. So the post-war modernist literature reflected a sense of disillusionment. भ्रमनिराश म्हणतो आपण. सध्या आपण त्याच परिस्थितीतून जात आहोत. And a kind of fragmentation was there. Fragmentation means what? Kind of disunity. People were not believing in unity. The society was fragmented. We look at COVID-19 situation very positively. We think that the family is coming together and all. But at the same time, our social integration is at question now. Because we are hiding our faces are no miss from human beings. We are believing in social distance because of course, that is the medical problem. But that's what is fragmentation. We are going away from each other. At the same time, you might be knowing more this technology too has brought this kind of barrier in human relationship. So it's a kind of fragmentation. So a primary theme of T.S. Eliot's long poem, The Westland, which was published in the year 1922, which is actually a very famous work, is the search for redemption and renewal in a sterile and spiritually empty landscape. In T.S. Eliot's The Westland, there is the search for redemption. Redemption means salvation, mukti, moksha, and renewal. Okay, newness, just to revive our lives. And the life, the landscape had become sterile. Sterile means something which is unproductive, napik, osad, and spiritually empty. And there was no spirituality. Everything was uncertain. No, people had lost their faith. And this work just searches for such kind of renewal and redemption. So with these fragmentary images and obscure allusions, if you read The Westland, you'll come across. It is very difficult to understand because of the fragmentary style. The images are fragmentary. The allusion, it is full of allusions. Allusion is one of the literary devices we might be knowing. Passing reference to something without explanation in the piece of literature. And the Westland is full of allusions. This poem is typical of modernism because the reader has to take an active role in interpreting the text. It is not easy to understand the Westland unless you have the active role. You take an active role in the interpretation. You understand different references. There are references from Srimad Bhagavad Gita. There are references from Bible. There are references from Holy Quran and other religious scriptures in this particular work. And it is not easy to understand Westland unless you have this knowledge. Another important work is James Joyce's Ulysses. So the publication of the Irish writer James Joyce's Ulysses, again in the same year, 1922, was a landmark event in the development of modernist literature. He uses stream of consciousness technique. I ask you people to go back to literary terms and concept to understand all these things. So dense, lengthy, and controversial, the novel details the events of one day in the life of three Dubliners. This novel gives the description of a day, the events of one day in the life of three Dubliners. Dublin is the capital of, you might be knowing, Ireland. Dubliners mean people from Dublin, just like Mumbaikar we say, Puneites we say. So Dubliners, three Dubliners means the three people belong to Dublin, the capital of Ireland, Northern Ireland. The novel describes the events of these three people in a very dense, lengthy, and controversial manner. and it uses a technique known as a stream of consciousness technique. Means this technique, as you know, ignores orderly sentence structure, and it accommodates, incorporates fragments of thoughts, whatever comes in a mind, in an attempt to capture the flow of characters' mental processes. So it tries to capture the natural mental process. Whatever thoughts are going on, they are presented as it is, without bothering about the sentences and all that. So this is fragmentation. And some of the parts of this book were considered obscene. And this book was banned for many years in English-speaking countries. Of course, apart from these other European and American modernist authors, whose works rejected chronological and narrative continuity, include Virginia Woolf, then Marcel Proust, Gertrude Stein, and William Faulkner. These are some of the modernist writers. They rejected this chronological and narrative continuity of the traditional writers. They came up with different style, different way of presenting their ideas. Lastly, I shall talk about the characteristics of modernism. These are some of the characteristics. Modernism is marked by a strong and intentional break with tradition. We understood it. This break includes a strong reaction against established religious, political, and social views. And it believed that the world is created in the act of perceiving it. Means what exactly? The world is what we say it is. Okay, however you perceive, that is the world. म्हणजे आपल्या दृष्टीतच सृष्टी लपलेली आहे. Okay, that is what they believed in. So this is how we understand modernism in literature, or literary modernism.